Any points of interest right now? Crop science, normally we have an industry discussion to start with before we get any further discussion. Chris?
Tomato weed, otherwise formerly known as silverleaf nightshade, is flowering nicely at the moment. Some people have just had a bit of rain, so it'll be a good time to be spraying.
Yes, it's a difficult pest weed that is continually the bane of many people. No significant biological controls will work on that one. So yes, get active on it while it's fresh. So, otherwise, the rain's been pretty thin on the ground lately. So,
Very good.
So, as I said, this is a joint meeting between Ag Institute. How many are familiar with Ag Institute? We've got a few. Obviously, being a joint meeting, there is going to be a crossover in membership. There are some members of Crop Science and Ag Institute. So, at this stage, Ag Institute is in recess. So, it's been in recess for a little over 12 months. This is the first event. We're going to hibernation mode here. The first event for 2021, and there is a series of events coming through. So at this stage, myself, Bruce Hancock, Kevin Pelosi, and Emma Peters, and Richard Porter are on the working group for Ag Institute to get these events coming through. So have a chat to any one of us about the activities that are planned. And there is a regular national newsletter that comes out, plus, and sorry, that's not repeating, it's, I've got to check it, so the national newsletter that comes out weekly. The state-based one is probably going to be every 2 months. Okay, so
is there a cost of membership?
There is a cost of membership.
So what that cost is?
It depends on the membership as to whether you're an associate or full, and whether you're practicing agriculturalist or not. I don't have that right off the top of my head. 400 and something? 421. 421, which would be the CP Ag membership. Yep. And I think the next one down is $50 less than that.
Yeah, and then you get the time and the interesting one, but it's about half.
Yes. Yep. So there is and it's much cheaper for students to join as well. So there's an incentive there. AIA really is representing the professional agriculturalists. So, but as I showed on there, so you don't. So you may also apply even if you don't have relevant qualifications, but it says there about having achieved professional status. Okay, so there is some information. I think Emma or Kimmy brought the flyer along.
Yeah, it's just out on.
Yep. So afterwards, more than welcome to grab that and information on the website as well. So it's a national body too, and overseas, America has taken the model of this professional accreditation, where you have to accrue points throughout the year to maintain your accreditation. So that's something the industry would like to happen, but in Australia it's not mandated. So, but AIA is that platform that would be able to do that. It's networking opportunity for professionals as well. Meetings have normally been held at the Waite. The immediate past president actually was Glenn McDonald, who's here this evening. So the meetings were at Waite, but there was also regional meetings as well. So there's, I remember one at Murray Bridge. So yeah, okay. And for those members of the audience that are, I'll scroll through this one as well, which is the Crop Science Society as well, which is particularly focused on crops. Understandably, the two presenters tonight aren't just crop focused. So the Ag Institute saw a valid opportunity to come in and share the meeting, networking opportunity. The meeting initially was going to be Friendly Farms Centre. The venue was probably a little bit small for the crowd we've got, and it was a basketball night. So there's only a glass window and a wall between the basketball courts. So I'm not sure how your attention level is, but having the whistle and the siren going off at quarter time would have been a bit of a distraction. So unfortunately we can that, but we will look to that venue further on down the track. So. Bruce, have I got anything else to add that I've forgotten? No? Otherwise, I think we'll move into our presenters. So we've got some two very good presenters that we've invited, and through the juggling, in terms of having a December meeting and then moving to a January meeting and then changing venue, have been accommodated. So Peter Appleford, SARDI, who's coming along to give a overview of where SARDI's at, but we've asked with reference to the grains industry blueprint that GPSA has put out. Obviously that is grains focused, but let's remember that grains industry crosses over into livestock and other industries as well. So Peter's going to provide that. And Melissa Rebbeck, who's here. You've probably heard Melissa present in previous roles. Melissa's going to provide an update of the current biochar status for the South Australian industry as well. So first up, I'll ask Peter to come up and I'll bring his presentation up. Should be sharing that now. So, okay, hopefully I've given a good enough introduction, but maybe you might want to give a 30-second background as well.
Okay, thanks, Graham. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for your efforts in organising the night. It's been difficult in these times to get these things to work at the moment, so appreciate your assistance. I'm the Executive Director of the South Australian Research and Development Institute, or SARDI. So we're broad-based, so we deal with all the agricultural sciences except for forestry. So we do fishing, horticulture, livestock, viticulture, etc. So we're fairly broad. I'm from Victoria originally, but I've been in South Australia about the last 3 years. We have to say. I was going to put a disclaimer in front of the talk about no technical questions, but I've noticed Rhiannon Shilling and Jenny Davidson and Bruce Hancock here, so go as technical as you like, but you have to just turn around to hear the answers. It won't be coming from the front. It'll be a fairly high-level presentation just to really talk about different strategies that the government and the industry have and how they're affecting where SARDI's going and its investment into the future. It is grains focused, so I'll try to remember to update on a bit of livestock stuff on the way through, but ask any questions about any part of it you like, including the livestock side of it. Did it work?
Get Craig is recording. Craig?
He's checking.
He's checking.
It is recording, yep, sorry.
Okay, I'm not sure how much you know about the South Australian Growth State Initiative, but it's a commitment from this government when they first came in. They reviewed the economy in South Australia and realised that it's been progressing about half the national average over the last decade. And they said, we've got to do something about this. So their aim was to, national average has been between 1.5 and 2, and they're saying, well, we want to aim to go at 3% per annum ongoing in South Australia as far as gross state product goes. They brought a person in who did a similar exercise in New Zealand, went through the different industry sectors and said, well, okay, where our opportunities exist? And through that, food, wine and agribusiness, which is a very broad sector, was identified as one of 9 key growth sectors for the state over the next 10 years. So it's recognised that it provides lots of the economy of South Australia, both export, regional employment, regional economic activity, etc. So it's fairly highly recognised through that. It's even become more important over the last 18 months, or 12 to 18 months with COVID hitting, where a lot of these new sectors that we're going to develop with industry investment from large companies, etc., as COVID hit, profits went down, investment declined, all of a sudden they realised there's some of these long-term industries that have been providing a lot of economic activity for the state, like agriculture, which are actually very fundamental to recovery, and providing investment into these industries is essential. Under that, with the state government worked with Primary Producers SA, the wine sector and food SA to develop what they've called the Food, Wine and Agribusiness Sector Plan. It's pretty boring on the outside, that's a copy of it. And the aim there is to reach a value of $23 billion by 2030 in the industry. The moment is sitting 16 to 18 billion, so it's quite a significant growth challenge there. But if it actually aligns fairly closely or very closely to the 3% annual growth. So if we can achieve the 3% annual growth, then we'll get there. Identified the plan, the food, wine and agribusiness, identified a lot of priority growth areas. One was in productivity. I won't go through all the dot points. But in productivity, in particular, ag tech has got quite a significant focus lately, but also looking through the value chain. So having a look at the whole supply chain and seeing where you can add value all the way through that supply chain, as well as increasing productivity and profitability at the local level. People and skills, particularly with the focus on the skills of the future and business capacity and capability, enhancing those. Infrastructure, the way digital connectivity, but also regional infrastructure, particularly as it relates to supply chains. Focus on markets, both the development opportunity in new markets, improved market access, whether it's through traceability, integrity, biosecurity, sustainability, making sure that the sustainability of the natural resources that underpin the sector is there, and making sure that biosecurity threats are managed. And also to try to get smarter regulation and minimise business cost and administrative burdens through regulatory processes. There's a few things out of the priority areas that we've picked on the way through. There are some examples of things that are happening and currently invested in, plus possible initiatives in the plan if you want to go and have a look at it. But again, it's high level. We're looking at a 10-year cycle here. There's things that we can achieve over the next 10 years to help increase the productivity of the sector. So under that, you've obviously got wine, you've got food. Quite often broadacre agriculture historically probably hasn't got the attention it deserves. So we're recently doing some numbers for another piece of work. If you look, broadacre cropping and livestock represents about 55–57% of value-added production in the state. If you take fisheries and forestry out, so you're looking at more of the traditional sectors and the land-based sectors, you're looking at about 2/3 of the agricultural value of the state comes out of those broadacre sectors. It also represents a large number of businesses, so over 70% of businesses in South Australia. And if you look at land usage and therefore land management across the country, it's about 99.8% of land used for agriculture. So you're looking at quite a large area that's under broadacre farming that has responsibility both for production and for management of the land in those areas. So that gives us a great base. If we can improve areas in grains and in cropping and livestock in the broadacre sector, it gives us a great base to actually improve the value of those, the sectors and achieve the targets for the state. It also gives us some really nice numbers to put in front of Treasury. So you can sit there with talking about $8 billion sectors instead of hundreds of millions of dollar sectors, etc. So it's actually good to capture the attention of the bean counters. So the grain blueprint, if you haven't had a read of it, it's got some, you'll see the alignment starts very quickly here, but increased productivity is one of the key platforms for the outcomes for the grain industry. Reduce the impact of climate, pest and disease, capturing opportunities in good seasons, adopting new technologies, decrease off-site impacts, sustainability, biosecurity risks being managed, better crop genetics, new value-added food and ingredient opportunities, maintain science-based partnerships. You'll see there, if you go back and have a look at the growth plan document, you'll see they just pretty much overlap. There's a very good alignment there, which means through the grain sector blueprint and also through the plan for the state government, you're actually getting common messages, which we can then look at reinvestment and co-investment into. The grain blueprint has 6 pillars. market opportunities, capturing value, biosecurity, market access, innovation, industry capacity, infrastructure. And again, it's a very good alignment between the two plans in that area. So it gives us a good base to move forward, particularly when we're talking to some of the investors in research and development, the MLAs of the world, or the GRDCs, or the Horticulture Innovation Australia. And you sit there and say, well, actually, you know, look at South Australia, we've got all these plans, they overlap, these are the priorities, the economy, we should be investing in those. Get a look at SARDI. SARDI's across the state, so we go up to Minnepa and in the west, all the way into Mount Gambier in the southeast, primarily for the livestock and grains industries. Minnepa's dry land agriculture, Loxton Services, broadacre agriculture out of there, but the research stations, horticulture, Clare Facilities, broadacre, Tara Fields, broadacre agriculture, as is Code Byline Strill. So we've got a number of facilities across the state with different production, so they target different types of production, but they've also got different climatic conditions. So I guess there's a good cross-sector across the state to do work. Historically, the research investors, such as the RDCs, don't want to invest in government farms to do research anymore. They'd rather do work on the private properties. That's fine, we're moving with that. What we're trying to use the farm for now is more demonstration. So actually working, sorry. Right? Yes. It's more demonstration. So actually working with the industry to get demonstration on the farms and de-risk some of the things for industry. They instead operate on the research farms, then decide whether they want to adopt or not. We'll talk a bit more about that when we get to ag tech in a sec. Research capability in the crop sciences. Agronomy is one of our strengths. Cereals and pulses, soil science, climate risk and analysis, crop physiology, crop improvement. Historically, we've had a large role in traditional breeding programs. They're becoming less and less. The RDCs want to outsource those to the private companies, which is fair enough. Vetch breeding is probably the last bastion of traditional crop breeding in SARDI. But we're moving a lot more to the pre-breeding part and molecular genetics, which assists the traditional breeding and trying to get greater genetic gains quicker for the industry through that process. But we're also starting to look more at how genetics and crop improvement can assist in the value-added products. So looking beyond yield and production, looking at quality traits. So how can you pick up the quality traits, maintain the yield, don't suffer yield losses, but if it's oat, beta-glucan, or if it's a pulse, maybe increasing the protein content or decreasing the fibre content, something like that. So actually look at different quality traits while maintaining the yield and the productivity for the farmers. Plant health biosecurity is going to be an ongoing focus for us. We have a lot of diagnostic services in soil through Predictor. Entomology, insect pest management is fundamental. Disease management and nitrogen fixation in the soil, so we concentrate a lot of effort there. And we do work in the irrigated crops area as well. Put together overall, we want to increase the productivity, increase the resilience of the industry, particularly to changing conditions, and help them manage the risk profile, or put in flexible dynamic management processes to help them manage the risk in the systems that move ahead. One of the comments I commonly get is, well, agriculture is just ticking along, increasing at 1% a year. People keep looking at the top number when it's good years and how much it's increasing in the good years, but they don't look at the bad years. They're nowhere near as bad as they used to be. This industry's got a lot more ability now to manage the risk profile in some of those bad years and keep production up. So instead of having a complete disaster and almost zero production, we're talking about bad years at 60%, 70% of average production. So it's been a massive change. We're just shifting the bottom up. Haven't got the peak and increase at the top yet, and so we've got to start looking and see if we can get that now again. But the underpinning is to make sure we've got that base maintained all the way through. So even though with the different strategies that are coming out, SARDI's going to maintain its base in agronomy, crop improvement, plant health and biosecurity, and irrigated crops, and extend and push a bit further in some of those areas to some of the other areas as we move forward, as we go. So where are we pushing at the moment? So apart from maintaining the base, we're looking at new initiatives. One of those is an open centre of excellence. We're looking at pulse proteins, plant-based food, a drought resilience and adoption hub, and ag tech demonstration site, which I'll run through sequentially for you. Don't worry about all the detail on the slide. One of the things we've recently put in is a transformation hub or research hub of value-added oats. This came out of some money we got out of the state government to look at trying to increase the export value of some of our crops. Pulses and oats became two of those that I want to have a closer look at. The gutsy bit of the slide is probably the orange boxes in the middle there. What we're trying to deliver on one side and genetics on the other. It's really about trying to focus the genetics, the agronomy and breeding, the processing technologies, and nutritional science, and actually try and get those all to work together. So instead of saying, well, okay, we're going to increase yield, we're going to say, well, we're going to increase yield, but we also want to increase this parameter because that fits in with the nutritional value of the oats, or it fits in with the processing needs of the oat company that are going to use the product at the end of the day. So it's trying to bring those four pillars together instead of operating in isolation, actually talking to each other a lot more. So if we go to the end point and you've got an Uncle Toby's that want to use the product at the end, you understand what parameters they're after and how that feeds back in. And are we going to improve that through genetics, or are we going to do it through agronomy, or are we going to do it through processing? By fractionating the oat before it goes off into the ingredient process. There's different ways of doing it. Historically, we sort of don't deal with those collectively. We've dealt with those individually, bringing those together now and saying, well, let's look at the value chain from one end to the other. Where can we create value all the way along that chain? Oats is well known, beta-glucans are there for cholesterol management. It's good for celiacs, it's less offensive to celiacs, but we still want to minimise the gluten equivalent, which is adenine, through that process. How do we keep doing that? By doing that, how to maintain the flavour, how to maintain the integrity so it's been used at the end, it's still valuable for the food producers as we move along. How do different parameters or different fractions deal with nutritional needs of people, etc. So it's just trying to bring those things together. So there's a combined bid with the University of Adelaide. You can find out about it shortly. But already we're working with the agronomy group to get different samples of the oats that they've been breeding over the last 20 years, put them through fractionation processes, having a look at the protein content, the beta-glucan content, etc. Not just in the whole crop, but in different fractions within it. So if you break it up into these size particles and use dry fractionation, you may find that you have an incredibly high protein one here, you might have a high carbohydrate one there, you might have glucan may not be evenly distributed across them, so you might actually be able to then increase the percentage of the ingredient for beta-glucan without changing the crop at all, just by fractionating different, working out your uses for your different fractions as you move forward. Sorry, don't worry. The pulse protein is an extension of that. We've got some money to join the pulse protein CRC, which is a CRC being put up by the University of Sydney, I think it was, Western Sydney. That wasn't successful, they got back and didn't get through to round two, but again, the idea there is to look at the pulse crops. A lot of the plant protein used in foods in Australia at the moment is soy-based. A lot of it's imported soy. It's highly processed, it's hydrolyzed. The process to get it into the form that's needed to make the food is very energy expensive. It's not friendly from a carbon perspective. It's not a great nutritional value, but it meets the desired characteristics of a lot of people as it's not meat, which is probably basically what a lot of them are looking at. So what we're saying now is, well, we've got actually a lot of pulses in South Australia that have a great profile for protein. Can we enhance that through fractionation? Are there flavouring components that we need to have a look at? Are there any anti-nutritional factors we need to take out? Again, can we do that by fractionation? If we reduce these fractions and send them off to the companies that use soy at the moment, will it match what they need to deliver their products? Some of the early feedback is that there's a lot of potential. It's hitting the right area in regard to some of the contents of the fractions. There's probably some of the pulses that potentially, and I can't remember the name exactly at the moment, some of the pulses that aren't attractive at the moment for the people to grow may be the best ones for this process. So maybe if we can work with that and actually create use those pulses that are less grown at the moment because they're not attractive to the endpoint which is currently available, increase the value of those and then feed them back into the system and see if the growers are willing to grow those based on the fact it's a different endpoint now. People say, well, if you do that, you're going to increase the value of the industry massively and make farms more profitable. The reality is that through this process, you want to create a diversified endpoint and hopefully stabilise the market price for the growers. And it may go up, it will go up a little bit, hopefully if we get it right. But the reality is they won't have these large variations in prices and get $600 a tonne one year for a crop and $200 a tonne next year because India puts a tariff on the crop or something, these diversified endpoints. And the aim there is more to stabilise the price with an above average increase rather than saying we're going to turn farmers into millionaires through this process. Similarly to plant-based foods, and all we're doing here is moving on the value chain. So we're moving from the crop to the fractionation to the food. What we want to see here is basically working with ingredient manufacturers saying, well, what do you need in your ingredients? Therefore, given that profile, when we look at the crops that are produced in South Australia, can we produce that profile we need? Then actually working with the ingredient people and the food manufacturer to deliver products into the market niches that are currently available, such as healthy, low-fat, low allergy alternatives, high-fibre food products, ready-to-eat food products, etc. And there's a whole range of products at the moment that the health food industries are trying to make that they just can't make. And they want to make it with all Australian ingredients, but they can't make it with all Australian ingredients. They're still importing a lot of ingredients. So the process there that we want to do is to work with the potential ingredient manufacturers, the farmers with the ingredient manufacturer, grow the right crop, be able to produce the right ingredient, the ingredient manufacturers with the food people saying, well, okay, if this is the ingredient, here's the food we can make out of it, here's what we need, and try to link that process together. So again, it's moving from just the paddock past the farm gate into the supply chain and trying to add value through the entire system.
You're a wonder man.
So we've got quite a large agronomy group within crop sciences. You'll see there that what we're looking at is economics and risk planning, plant phenology, genetics, weather and climate, soil and crop nutrition, new technologies and innovations, pest, weed and disease management. And they're the areas we're going to have to focus on as money becomes tighter, which it is constantly. The ability to do everything for everyone's becoming less and less possible. So you've got to diversify. You've got to stick to your strengths within your organisation. Certainly, agronomy is one of our strengths. So if you look at probably the three key ones, it's just biosecurity through pest and disease management, agronomy and crop improvement. That's probably where a lot of the focus is going to be. The question then becomes how to use those to get the targets for the industry. How do we work with the other people to do the other things to make everything fit together to work as we move forward? We just recently worked with the University of Adelaide to put in a South Australia Drought Resilience and Adoption Hub bid. For those who don't know, the Future Drought Fund has put up $8 million over 4 years into each of 8 drought hubs. And the idea there is to, particularly initially, is to take the existing technologies and science and that are available and get them and work with farmers or producers to get those technologies or that science or those management regimes taken up to improve the resilience of the farmers. So we worked very hard with this. We concentrated on the broadacre crops and livestock. One, because of the value, two, because they're rainfall driven and they tend to have the greatest initial impact from drought or dry season conditions. Initially, we're going to focus on the low rainfall areas and the ones that we're moving into low rainfall with as the climate changes, but then after consultation with the industry, it became very clear that there's changes all over the state in regard to broadacre farming and climate change or drought. So we've put in a bid at the moment. It's got a central hub based here at Roseworthy and a node out in Minnetonka Peninsula, one at Port Augusta for pastoral land, one at Uraroo up in north, Loxton Research Centre for the Murray Lands and Riverland, and the Stewart Research Centre for the southeast limestone coast, hills and fluorine KI. You see in the busy diagram there on the right, number of stakeholders. So I think the bid contains 58 partners. But what we're actually doing there is we're trying to set up the nodes with local partners and local deliverers. So what we want to do is use the farming groups and use AgX Alliance and the different existing groups within South Australia. And so, okay, if we can get the money in, what we want to do is work with you and use your existing networks to increase the adoption of the technology. So constantly people are saying, well, things exist but they're not being adopted. So the focus now is moving, well, okay, how do we help industry adopt? Is that through demonstration? Is it through education? Is it through upskilling? But again, having a really local focus to that. So say out in western Minnetonka, okay, if Minnetonka, what are the challenges on the air conditioner? What are the sort of technologies and what are the sort of innovations that need to be taken up? Okay, once we've identified that, how do we put mechanisms in place to enhance the uptake of those, and how do we work with the local groups to get that to happen? Initially, it's existing information. Next year or the year after, they'll be bringing out innovation grants, and there's the chance for those groups that are part of the hub to start applying for those innovation grants to actually drive new information, new technologies, new systems. So we see this, if we can get it up through the Commonwealth, to be a really fundamental platform for the broadacre industries about getting the science into the industry, or getting the innovations into the industry and actually adopted as practice, with more of a structured mechanism to do that. For those who have been around long enough, the state governments used to do a lot of extension work back in the 90s, and they've taken it out over time. Everyone's saying, well, we're not getting the extension done, we're not getting the adoption that we should be getting done. So this is part of the attempt to bridge that gap and enhance the adoption.
So can I ask a question about drought funding?
Yep.
So basically over the last several years there's been various programs trying to get some federal money back to states where drought cleared areas were.
Yep.
It's been absolutely blatantly abused. And for example, in the Barossa, the ranges, the Valley Range of livestock, most of those dams didn't have watering for quite a number of years. There were serious appeals for water infrastructure to be brought in because there was destocking of total farms and people driving 46 kilometres to get water for livestock. $1 million grant was given to a Barossa council, and the way that was busted up, I think it was $450,000 for township footpaths, $250,000 for tourism signage, a maximum of $300,000 for water infrastructure for farms. So this is just absolute bullshit. So will you guys get heavily involved in the bullshit to make sure it doesn't happen again? So drought funding is for primary industry and is for farmers, and they don't get this twisted wording from regional development to screw it up.
Yeah, so those packages were targeted at those activities, and as the money came out of the Commonwealth, it was particularly targeted for it. It was seen as an economic stimulus package for different regions, as opposed to actually a farming
But it was actually called a drought package.
I don't know what it's called, a drought package, but that's what they've done with it. The idea of this is actually to spend the money through the local groups that are the partners. So the idea here is if we get the money, it's overall the $8 million from the Commonwealth that gets up at full value, plus $8 million worth of cash in kind from all partners. We've got a $16 million program over 4 years across the state to be delivered through the local nodes. So through the farming groups, through the different entities in the local region, they should be developing, they will be developing the priorities. They'll decide what the priorities for their particular areas are, and then how can new information technologies, etc., assist bridging that gap or solving that issue for them and working directly with those. So the whole idea through this is actually not to have a director that sits in Rosewood and gives the money out, actually sit there and say, here are the needs, here. And then through those nodes, they drive what's needed. That provides a lot of the distribution of the existing funding, which should also drive the ideas to get the next round of funding through the innovation grants, etc. But it has to be driven locally, it has to be driven through the nodes. It can't be delivered centrally and then passed out. It's got to be worked actively with the groups in the regions that are involved in the farming activities.
Accountability is important.
Yeah, absolutely. Got any further questions? Rhiannon drafted it up the back. It was there on it. If it doesn't work, it'll all be her fault. It's a fantastic job. Again, you'll see there, and even in the governance model there, we're looking at is we want an advisory boards for the DPSA on it. The University and PERS of Livestock SA, Primary Producers SA, at the highest level. Locally, you want the stakeholder groups on the board, so you want the regional partners actually driving the process. You want the node coordinators to be accountable, obviously, to the director, but again, the director needs to be influenced or informed by the governance arrangements at the highest level through the statewide representative groups. The node coordinators need to be informed at the local level through the stakeholders, and it needs to drive the priorities through the system. And again, we want to get we'll be going out to market if we're successful for a director. What we want to have is a director there that's got experience, who's actually plays in this area of adoption into the broad sectors. You'll see there that at the moment the initial knowledge broker is going to be Mark Stanley from AGX. Because again, we want someone who's involved with the industry, who knows the system, knows the players, knows the issues, can actually work closely with them all the stuff to demonstrate into the area. We don't want to have a career scientist being a knowledge broker. We want somebody who's got a long-term experience in the knowledge broking space. AgTech, for those who aren't aware, the South Australian Minister released his South Australian AgTech strategic plan a few months ago. There's a lot of different areas in that. As far as SARDI goes, we're heading up the AgTech area for PERSA and generally for government. Our philosophy is we don't want to be developing the technologies. The universities are well positioned to develop the base technologies that are going to be applied. The private sector is doing a great job of developing technologies to use in the AgTech space. We don't want to go into competition with them to do that. What we want to do is we want to make sure that the AgTech is fit for the purpose of South Australian farmers. And that may be adopting or adapting international technology, not developing new technology here. But the feedback we've had constantly while we're developing what we're going to do in the AgTech areas, farmers buy AgTech and doesn't do what it's meant to do, they get burnt. The AgTech developers don't really understand the industry, so they're technical orphans, and therefore they don't produce something that looks great in a lab when a 1,000 kilogram steer lands up against it. It doesn't last too long. And it's the value proposition just isn't there for the technologies. So what we want to do is we want to develop what we call a two-way marketplace for technologies developers in the industry. What we want to actually get the technology developers to do is interact with the industry during the development of the product. Now, if they've got a product, what we want them to do is work with the industry in the different regions with their product and keep evolving it so it actually suits our needs properly. If it works fine, that's great. And we've got to de-risk the growers, for the producers. So the aim there is to use the farms across the state to demonstrate the technology, get data over a year or 2 years on reliability, the cost of the data, servicing, etc. So the producers then go in and say, well, okay, we're interested in soil moisture probes. We may have had 4 different flights and soil moisture probes in the state on different farms operating for 12 months or 18 months, and come in and they can see all the data. How often they've been up, how often they've been down, what the response time's been like, what they cost. But more importantly, what we also want to do is make sure that that technology is linked to a decision that the farmer needs to make. So the first demonstration farm for AgTech up near Canberra, which MLA set up, they just called for ag tech. So everyone who had a bit of ag tech were on the farm. Some wasn't commercially available, some wasn't well supported, and most of it, they then started to try to work out what they're going to use the data for. What we want to do is sit there, and what we are doing is going out to the industry and saying, we've got a low rainfall mixed farming venture at Minnepa. Here's the key decisions that farm needs to make. And if you've got a technology that will assist in either undertaking these activities or informing these decisions, then we're interested in having your technology on the farm. So we want to link basically the technology to activity or decisions on the farm, but then we also want to link that to the bottom line, to the balance sheet, and say, well, okay, through this technology, here's the information that's provided, here's how it's used, and here's what the change has been on the ground as a result of that decision. If we get that right, I think what we can do is de-risk for existing products, we can de-risk the investment decision for farmers to a certain degree. We also want to get startups out into the regions where we can, working with the farmers. So if they've got a good idea and they're going to develop something, they've actually got a base out in the regions, whether it's Minnepa or Hoxton or Struan, where they can base their startup and work directly with the farmers in that area to develop their product over time. So that's the overall approach we're taking to AgTech. Again, it's really on the adoption of AgTech state area. How do we get increased adoption through better products, through better information to the supply, to the farmers or the producers, and hopefully if we can close some of those gaps down, we'll be able to get better products that are going to enhance activity, and then we'll get the uptake of AgTech as we go ahead. And I think that's probably about it for now.
Second presenter tonight. So as Melissa's introduced herself during the previous presentation, Melissa's working for climate agricultural support, climate and agricultural support, sorry, correct me. So and you're based down on the Flurio, well actually Alexandria area, but beyond Flurio. Marshall, there you go. Yep. So and Melissa's going to provide an update of where the Australia-New Zealand biochar, but really specific to the South Australian industry. And we understand that this has implications not just for cropping, but also in livestock as well, but also NRM. So there's been some work in terms of improving water quality. So that it had a cross-linkage with crop science and the Ag Institute as well. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Melissa. I'm sure she'll be able to take charge of the room.
Thank you. You gave me the graveyard shift. I'm not in bed at this time. So I'll try and keep you all awake. I bought props. So yes, and thank you for inviting me along. Yeah, and I did work for SARDI for since about 1998 for 16 years, and then I was poached by the University of Adelaide here for a couple of years before I transitioned into my company, Climate and Agricultural Support, and I've been doing that. I work with a lot of farming systems. I'm also an elected member for Alexandrian Council because I guess for our region in particular, I'm quite passionate about water and agricultural productivity and economic viability in our region, so I the way that I work a little bit in the political space as well. But really excited, I guess, with the work that I've done, as a scientist, both within SARDI, but now through my company, biochar is probably some of the most exciting work I've ever done. So really looking forward to filling you in on what it's all about. So for those of you who don't know, biochar, and I'll start sending around my props, is a charcoal-like substance, but it's produced in the absence of oxygen and under high heat, and that is what activates it, if you like, and makes it different to charcoal. And it can be up to 90% carbon. You're right.
Oh, I was going to pass it around.
Oh, yes, okay. It can be up to 90% carbon. So what I've got here, though, before I pass it around, is it's got a high bulk density as well. So that is 300 kilos biochar. That is 300 kilos of really bad soil.
That's the teaspoon. Some of us eat this, don't they?
So, and you can eat it, yes, you can eat it, because that's actually organic, and feed companies often, you go to them, they will eat it, and if they don't die, then they'll incorporate it. There's soil from, actually my neighbour's front yard, but don't tell them. So it's the absence of oxygen and the high heat that activates it, and it's that it has a high cation and anion exchange capacity, and it's pretty much like putting a battery into your soil or into the animal if you feed it to the animal, and it activates the minerals and components within that. There's a whole lot of literature around feed conversion, which I'll get to. It provides positive effects on biochemical, soil and animal productivity, benefiting agriculture, food, water and energy security. It can be produced from any carbon-based feedstock, including biomass from farms and food waste. And I'm actually in the process of working with Kangaroo Island farmers, and so with the Kangaroo Island fires, that ripped through, that's a chunk of wood from that was burnt on the outside, but it's actually really good wood on the inside.
Let's start on the camera.
Really good wood on the inside. and so, you know, there's opportunities in Kangaroo Island. I guess there's an enormous amount of timber that was burnt. This is eucalyptus globulus that can be turned into biochar, and I think that that's an opportunity that is also exciting. It's turning a waste into a product that can give you more productivity. And so I'm finding myself kind of almost in that industry space as well, because, you know, timber is agriculture. I'm in that space of climate and ag support, and you're looking at the whole circular economy, but also circular productivity within agriculture. So I can leave that one there, you don't really need to look at it. I'll put that one down. So I guess in Australia as well, you know, talking about agricultural productivity, increasing the economy, we've got the whole Australian, you know, Australia has to get to 60 billion by 2030. It's estimated that 50 to 100 million metric tonnes per year of biomass residues go into landfill or are burned, which theoretically could produce 10 to 30 million metric tonnes of biochar in Australia. And so that has an economic value of $7.5 to $15 billion, or if we're pricing it at $500 a tonne, but in fact people spend a lot more on that. One of the things I find I've been working through as a consultant as well, and through the SA Lifestyle Consultants, is to turn up to producers' farms where they've got all this that have been burnt in the fires, and you turn up and they're burning their trees. And you don't burn it because you can actually turn it into biochar and use it in your agricultural productivity, which is what I'm going to go through. So biochar provides a range of valuable carbon-based products and services with multiple environmental, agricultural, economic and social co-benefits. There is lots and lots of science that is emerging and new, but there needs to be a lot more work in that space. I'm working on a biochar industry blueprint for ANZBIG, so I put ANZBIG logo up there because I'm on the board of that, which is the Australian New Zealand Biochar Industry Group. They have standards in terms of how it should be produced, they have agricultural standards and how it should be used, and there's more and more science coming into that space, and I've done a lot through my company as well. So, you know, there's work, so I'm going to touch on, you know, on some of that science that's been done to date. There's also the carbon drawdown perspective of it as well. By removing 10 to 30 million tonnes of carbon dioxide, we mitigate several percent of Australia's total greenhouse gas emissions, and we can do that through the biochar. And so biochar could be also part of agricultural sector contribution towards the net zero targets. We're trying to get that into that. It's been recognised through the international panel on the climate change as a technology that can help work towards that. There are many other biochar uses as well, though, if you are into the production of it. Biochar can also be used in road construction, There's information out now from bitumen companies to say that add 10% biochar in, it actually provides a stronger road. There's building materials, there's concrete, there's steel. So the steel industry are looking at being more green, and so adding biochar into the steel, it doesn't break down, it lasts for 1,000 years. There's also byproducts like wood vinegar, bio oil, there's energy, there's fertilisers, there's herbicides, and so the wood vinegar can be used as a fertiliser, herbicide and pesticide. But in addition, in terms of the production, which I won't get to go into too much, is there's a whole range of ways in which biochar is produced, some of which can generate electricity, and that's the exciting other thing for Kangaroo Island in terms of how that happens, because at the moment their power goes underground from Cape Jervis. There was a survey of 17 different users, not very many, but in terms of what are their motivations and how they use it. The top one is through animal feed. The second one is crop yield effect. But by feeding it to an animal, it actually stays in manure. It doesn't get digested and it stays in manure, so it has an ongoing circular effect if it's then part of the manure and then ends up in the soil. And that's the space that I've been working in. So I'm just going to touch on some of this science. I guess that the purchase cost for agriculture ranges from anywhere from about $100 a tonne up to $4,500 a tonne. It's available at all different prices. The stuff that I've been using in agriculture, I've been getting from interstate at around about $800 a tonne, but we hope to be able to produce it at much less in South Australia. And if we actually end up producing it on the island, we're aiming at about $300 a tonne for farmers to purchase it at that price. So there's a whole range of studies that looked at the net user benefit of, what 1 tonne of biochar means in terms of tonnes of production, and so I'm just going to touch on some of those, but also my own research. So firstly, I'll talk about mine. I conducted a biochar dairy feeding trial with Fluoro Milk Co, and we fed biochar to the dairy for a year. The difficulty with working directly with farmers is it's really difficult to get a control, but after talking with statisticians, the good thing is that dairies have really good records going back into history. So we had back to 2016 milk yield data, and so we were able to compare the data from 2019 back to what happened in 2016, 17 and 18, and see if we could detect any changes. And I've had Professor Wayne Pitchford here from the university have another look over our data recently, and so we've had a couple of really senior statisticians look at that, and we're really excited about the results. We fed it at just 150 grams per head per day, so generally with livestock we're feeding it at less than 0.05% of their intake. And it's actually not a feed, it's an additive, if you like, which activates the feed. And so there's a whole lot of properties which are well documented now in terms of what it does in the rumen, in terms of activating that rumen, reducing the methanogens, improving feed conversion. There's multiple authors that have found that it improves feed conversion. It's this redox active type process in the rumen that actually helps that feed activation work. There's also literature coming out to say that it reduces methane, and the other one is that it can absorb toxins. So, a lot of animals now, especially in dairies, are exposed to lots of toxins, pesticides, herbicides, fertilisers. So just to look at these yields, this particular graph just goes back to 2017, but we were able to separate 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old and mature animals. And this is when the biochar started being fed here, so in February 2019, and the 2-year-old animals, in fact, the animals that are in their first lactation, in their first calf, increased much more than some of the other animals, but there was also an increase in the 3-year-old, 4-year-old and mature animals. So, you know, if we went back to 2017, some of the milk yields are only around about 14.5 litres. But by the end of our trial, we had milk yields up around 20.5 litres with the 2-year-old or animals in their first lactation. The animals, the 3-year-old, 4-year-old mature also increased their yield. We also found an increase in protein. Without going into too much detail, we actually found that we had an average of 1.4 litres per day, per head per day, increase in milk yield. So you imagine holding up a milk carton, it was nearly 1.5 of those milk cartons per animal per day that they increased their milk yield. So if that's around 49 cents per litre, it actually increased the profit over a year of $62,000 for that particular farm just by feeding 150 grams of biochar. And the ease of it was just getting it to the feed meal mixer, and they added it into the feed mix, and away we went. But we also found an increase in the protein, and that was valued around $5,000. So in total, it was around $68,000 increase for a cost of $8,100 in biochar, valued at $600 a tonne. You get it less, then that's much better. The farmer also reported a reduction in the amount of fodder that was fed to round bales per week, and that's consistent with the literature and other things that we're finding. So saving about $12,000 in fodder, and so really an increase in earnings of $61,000. So, you know, what we're trying to do in the industry is looking at the net user benefit. So per tonne of biochar was about a $4,531 net user benefit per tonne of biochar. So improved milk yield by 1.4 litres, improved solids by about 0.1 kilo, improved profit. But that's not the end of it. And so because I then took initial samples, during that period I took before and after soil, plant samples, and we found anecdotal evidence for an increase in soil health and productivity in the soil, and so that warranted further studies. And so I set up a replicated trial where we actually got there's a split plot design where we put biochar in manure and biochar under the manure, and no biochar, just having manure, and in the present, what the theory is, because the fluoro have been proven, the fluoro have really active populations of dung beetles, so they bury the dung within a couple of days. So I went in to further investigate what happened in detail to the soil and to the plant tissue and to the biomass. So, but just talking a bit of SHIT, first off, like with animals, and this is what I'm talking about, and why I brought up with Peter, you know, the diversity in animals and you know, the ability of animals to provide biomass and productivity back into the soil. If you've got cows, for example, 50 cows produce a tonne of dung a day. 250 cows, which is what this farmer had, produced nearly 2,000 tonnes of dung in a year. And so on an average property that dairies have, it's a spread rate of about 1.3 tonnes per hectare of manure. Biochar is not digested, so it's in the manure, and what we found by testing the manure is also highly activated, so that contains a lot more minerals and nutrients as well to start with. And then the dung beetles bury this manure. So stepping back, we've got an increase in the milk yield, but it's this circular process where the biochar stays in the dung and then it's buried by dung beetles into the soil. And so just hot off the press, these results, but these might be published, so I'm just, so we found that statistical differences in our treatments, so where we've got dung only, just this is the biomass, just looking at the dung only biomass over 3 different biomass collection dates. This is with 200 kilograms per hectare biomass in, so we've got greater biomass. This is just off of a 1 metre by 1 metre plot. When there's no biochar, we've got much less biomass. We've got 100 kilograms of biochar or 200 kilograms of biochar under the dung. It doesn't seem to be as effective on the whole thing. I've got a whole lot more data to go through, but I just pulled out the phosphorus. So we found by putting biochar in the dung or under the dung, there's an increase in the phosphorus in the soil as well. So this is in the plant tissue. So it's carried through from the soil into the plant tissue. And so where we've got biochar in dung, we've got more phosphorus, and biochar under dung. But there's a whole lot of other data, and I've got lots and lots of other trials that we've done, but this is really exciting as well to find things like mycorrhizal fungi presence in the soil. So where we've got biochar in, we have much more mycorrhizal fungi, and as opposed to where we had nothing. Microorganisms in the soil have increased. One of the other exciting things we're finding is that the pH is increasing. We found a slight pH increase in this trial, but I've got other trials where the pH has increased by 1 unit with biochar just on top of the soil. Here's a different soil health trial that we conducted, another split plot block design where we had different treatments of biological fertilisers and biological fertilisers with biochar. So the FFF, or the ones that are black, have got biochar in it. Again, we found increasing microbial diversity. Nitrogen fixation had increased with biochar, bacteria had increased, and the carbon in the soil, more importantly, had also increased with biochar. And as I said, we ran some trials with a whole range of farmers, and I've just put in here cation exchange capacity because biochar increases the cation exchange capacity. None of these trials had biochar in them, but everywhere where we've had biological treatments, we found cation exchange capacity increases as well. This is just some trials I did. I don't know why that's in there. I'm not going to go into that in too much detail, but trials I did with soil testing on chemical versus biological producers' properties, and where there's more biological farming, we've got an increase in cation exchange capacity, which is really important for the nutrient and mineral uptake into the plant tissue and then absorption by the animal. But biochar will build soil carbon by increasing a whole range of things. We found increase in free-living nitrogen-fixing bacteria. When you've got that, you've got more available nitrogen. It will support microbes to live within the soil by providing the opportunity for them to transfer nitrogen and providing a house, because biochar in itself is quite porous and it provides an opportunity for those microbes to live, and also more moisture as well. And it will increase pH and it will increase the cation exchange capacity. Another trial I did, we had biochar with different rates of fertiliser. So this is a farmer that would speak about why he did the trial.
So the reason why we have a biochar trial is that I suppose when you look into the theory behind it, certainly on sandy soils, I think it might lead to a bit of, I think it's got merit. So for us on a new block with sandy soils, we thought it was an obvious fit for us to give it a bit of a crack and put the time in to try and get that right. So yeah, I think for sandy soils, it's going to be a huge benefit in certainly minimising fertiliser, the leaching process, I suppose carbon neutral type farming, if you want to look at it that way. So yeah, they're the reasons why we thought we'd give it a go.
That trial, we incorporated biochar with 100 and 200 kilograms of nitrogen, and we found that everywhere we had biochar, we had increased biomass, and it really didn't make much. So this is 100 kilograms of, so 200 kilograms of biochar and half rate of nitrogen, which was 100 kilos, and then 200 kilograms of biochar with a full rate of nitrogen. So there's differing rates of biochar and differing rates of nitrogen, but basically we found that, just long story short, without going into too much detail, that that the biochar made fertiliser last longer in the soil, and basically gave us better biomass as well. And because what we're finding, I suppose, in particular with nitrogen fertiliser, is that you can lose 40 to 60% of that nitrogen through leaching and volatilisation. And so biochar, when you actually add nitrogen granules into the biochar, it sticks to it because of that cation and anion exchange capacity, and it keeps it in the soil for longer and makes it, I guess, more slow release, but also has other biological aspects to it. And so there are other trials like this that have found similar results to what I found.
So,
oops, on from that. So just to summarise the animal benefits, there's other reported animal benefits as well, like reduction in disease. There's a particular paper that reports reduced symptoms of St. George disease, fuller udders on beef cattle leading to improved calf development, reduced incidence of digestive issues with early weaning calves and reduced scarring, happier and shinier coats, reduced incidence of animal mortality due to plant poisoning, an increase in weight gain, and I've just highlighted what I found: improved feed conversion, increased milk yields, and substantial increase in profits. There's other reports of high conception rates, heavier calves and heavier cows. That's one of my cows. We've got beef cattle on Hamash Island, and that's Stuart the cow, happily eating his biochar. He's got biochar in his nose. And just to summarise the soil health benefits, we found, by feeding biochar through an animal, okay, so you get the milk production benefits, but it doesn't end there. If you've got dung beetles as well, because feeding biochar to an animal in the presence of dung beetles improves production and profitability. It builds the soil carbon, the soil health, the pH, the cation exchange capacity. It can increase soil moisture holding capacity and reduce runoff. It can increase soil carbon because it is 90% carbon. It adapts to and mitigates climate change. So you've got the methane reduction potential by feeding it. You've got the nitrous oxide reduction potential if you've got dung beetles present, because they're burying the manure within a couple of days. And then you've got the fact that it's actually adding carbon to the soil. So it's doing carbon, nitrogen and methane. But if you just also add it to the soil, it can reduce your dependence on synthetic fertilisers. It can ameliorate soil toxins because it can build pH. It can be an alternative to lime. There's lime trials going on with Brian Hughes and having a look at how biochar does that. It can be an alternative source to gypsum as well and break up the soil. It can increase soil water holding capacity, and there's literature to say that for every 1% we increase our soil carbon, we increase our water holding capacity by 10 to 30 tonnes per hectare. And for every 1% you increase your soil carbon, you increase your production by 10 to 30% as well. And we know from agriculture that we've depleted our soil carbon. There's other literature to say that our soil carbon used to be 20%. On average across Australia, and this is where Peter might be interested, our soil carbon is now down to 1%. So we've got a huge opportunity to rebuild that soil carbon. For every 1%, we get an extra 10 to 30% increase in production, and that's where I think our productivity gains can come from. We know we're actually measuring, we've got farmers out through the Figaro Beef Group that are actually now part of the emission reduction fund and applied and measuring, baselining the soil carbon to see where they get to by the dung beetles. But I've also got more trials going on with feeding beef cattle as well to see where that gets to with their soil carbon. As I sit on I'm the Vice President for the Murray-Darling Association. One of the things I advocate for heavily is to provide farmers a bigger carrot to increase their soil carbon, because if they do that, will increase our agricultural production, but it's the water holding capacity that we don't look at as a water saving measure. And, you know, there's all this pressure, I guess, on irrigators to get better and more efficient at irrigating, which we do the best in South Australia, I might add. New South Wales is really bad at it. But we don't look at our water holding capacity and our water use efficiency, and we need to actually incorporate technologies, if you like, ag technologies to increase our water holding capacity, and biochar is a very key thing to that. The other thing that will do is stop runoff of synthetic fertilisers and that sort of thing into streams and into waterways and into dams that impact on the health of animals and humans. Just to touch on a couple of other things, Doug Powers, a lot of this started with Doug Power and the ANZ Biochar Industry Group. He started feeding his animals biochar, his cows. He mixes it up with molasses and they just ad-lib it, and that's exactly what I do. And found a whole lot of benefits, which you can Google him and find. There's lots of YouTubes with him. But he also put it into his avocados, so he just mixed up a whole lot and put it under his avocados. Got what percent it was, I think. But what he found straight off, so this is the control, and this is with biochar, that he had almost a 5-fold increase in his yield, and the size of his avocados were, you know, huge compared to the avocados in the control, and that has been long lasting. It's not just been in the first year; it's been in the second year, the third year, and now the fourth year that he's found it. And so, you know, biochar doesn't break down; it lasts in the soil for 1,000 years. There's other results with potatoes where they're reporting the net user benefit per tonne of biochar as 53,400. I don't know if that's quite right, but what they found was that they both got bigger potatoes, but they also got more tubers per plant. So they got higher yields, but they also got more tubers per plant. Here, with their different results, is that they mixed biochar up with different rates of organic fertiliser. So the control was an organic fertiliser, and they mixed it up with different rates. It depends on what organic fertiliser was in that. And what people are finding is necessarily that more biochar is not necessarily higher yield, because it's what it does to the whole soil process. So there's a whole plethora of research waiting to be done in terms of rates and how much you can feed it, and a whole lot of other things which we hope to kind of work through with this biochar industry blueprint and opportunities. So that's the avocados, potatoes. There's been feedlot results showing that a control compared to just 1% biochar in the feed increased the weight gain of the animals, and so I'm really interested in that space and working through doing some trials with beef myself, but not in feedlots. And also there's a whole lot of other measurements you can take with cattle in terms of conception, scouring, all that sort of stuff that there's opportunity to do more work in. So just to summarise ag benefits and broader benefits is that we know by feeding biochar you can increase animal productivity, and it's fed at less than 0.05%, and there's a range of ways of getting it in. I've got sheep producers buying it now in Kangaroo Island that are just mixing up with already mineral lips that they provide out there, but you can just mix it with an oil or molasses and they will ad-lib. We know that it's increased milk yield and solids. But we also know that if it goes through to manure, you get this, I guess, cascading benefit. So, so you feed it to your animals, and if you're continuing to do that, it's continuing to go into the manure. If you've got dung beetles, that will constantly be buried. And those that have done that, like Doug Powell, he's found a whole species change over his property and an increase in his soil health and productivity and animal health, and that just keeps going because he's constantly feeding it to his animals. But you can't just put it straight on the soil and in the soil, and there's projects out there that are published to show increase in avocado, potato, tomato and cereal yields. I actually did a trial on my wheat last year, and where I just didn't mix it with any fertiliser at all, And where we had no biochar, we got 3.3 tonnes per hectare, and when we put biochar, we had 4.5 tonnes per hectare. So that was quite exciting. I had a contractor that did that, and he rang me up and said, "Oh, I was actually quite surprised with that." And we know that it can reduce methane and nitrous oxide. We know that it can increase soil carbon, increase water holding capacity, provide better water quality. There's a whole range of research that's used in America and China and other places to improve water quality. We know it can reduce diseases and toxin-related illnesses, and increased regional. There's opportunities also for increasing regional and rural jobs from biochar production. The work that I'm talking about on Kangaroo Island, there's 3 producers there that have 450,000 tonnes of biochar, timber. Likely to make, from that you get about 33 of the biomass back out as biochar, so that would make maybe about 150,000 tonnes of biochar. If we can do that, get that happening, we can increase, provide jobs, and there's a whole lot of opportunities there with biochar production from the other byproducts that I touched on, not to mention the carbon drawdown and payback. It adapts, it mitigates, it increases productivity, and it regenerates the soil, which is really important. There's this whole talk about regenerative ag. It's estimated from 108 million acres, this is from America, of current adoption. They estimate regenerative ag to increase to a total of 1 billion acres by 2050. That rapid adoption is based on part on historic growth rate, but also how organic agriculture and where that's going. This could result in a total reduction of 23.2 gigatons of carbon dioxide from both sequestration and reduced emissions, and regenerative ag could provide $1.9 trillion in financial return by 2050. So I've talked about the billion-dollar industry for Australia with biochar, but also the financial return from the carbon sequestration and reduced emissions is another whole thing. I worked on this with a colleague, this kind of wheel of this integrated carbon offset model, and we're still working on it. Just got questions, we're not quite there yet, but in terms of where there's opportunity to sink carbon, agriculture provides the biggest opportunity, I guess, to mitigate climate change, because, and especially in Australia owns 50% of our country. Agriculture is 50% of Australia, and for our soil carbon at the moment is down to 1%, and we've got this opportunity to get it back up to 10%. There's a huge range of opportunity for increasing our production, but also a huge opportunity for Australia in itself to sequester carbon and maybe cash in on that. And I think biochar provides a role here in forestry, in land use change, in soil carbon, in waste, because you can compost waste and landfill, in feed additives, in energy efficiency. We haven't got it there yet, but with some of the biochar that is produced and the way that it's produced, it can actually produce electricity, and biofuels as well. So it's got opportunity right across this carbon offset model. Just quickly to touch on biochar production, there's a few pictures of different opportunities to produce it. There's mobile units that you can purchase and put on farms for around about $5,000, but you can actually make your own kiln in your backyard as well. So I've got a few different, with the land care groups, landscape boards rather, projects in for these small kilns, but also looking at these larger kilns as well. It depends on the material and how wet it is and running time and a whole lot of things. So we've just put together, for example, the type. You can go from a stove that might cost $6.50 to make the purchase, right down to a continuous fixed kiln, which is about $3.5 to $4 million. We've actually got one of these rainbow beater in the southeast, and that is working through some difficulties with the wood and its material to get it out into production. We're learning more and more. So it's really important to have an understanding of, your material, is it wet or is it dry? How to process it, do you have it in chips or in large chunks? How much do you input and how much do you get out? What are the heating emissions? Does it produce carbon dioxide or does it? A lot of them are circular, so they don't. They actually are all enclosed. Does it produce electricity? So some of these larger continuous kilns produce electricity that can be put back into the grid. And what are the other byproducts? So there's a whole lot there as well. So I guess the next steps for the biochar industry is a blueprint. So we've applied to the AgriFutures grant to get some funding to do a blueprint, because it seems to be the flavour of the month for grazing sheep and beef. And I've had a little bit of input into the beef and sheep ones. So if that comes through, I'll be heading up that biochar industry blueprint. And we think we can reach a minimum of 30 million per annum. If this Kangaroo Island opportunity comes up, their biochar, if they produce biochar at 150,000 tonnes, and it's valued at $300 a tonne, that's $52 million alone just for that. We think that the rainbow people in the southeast themselves will surpass that by 2030. So we feel like there's a long way to go in terms of where the industry gets to. It's certainly growing in the US and in China, in other countries. There's an international biochar industry group, and we have our own, which is that Australia New Zealand biochar industry group. And by all means, Google them, because all those standards and other documents and background research is on that website. And the research that I've mostly shown you today is on my website, which is Climate and Agricultural Support.